The notification arrived at 6:47 in the morning. I was barely awake when I reached for my phone, expecting nothing out of the ordinary. What I found instead was my own face staring back from the screen. My photo had been cropped tightly and placed beneath bold words. My sister stole from our family and lied about everything. My phone kept buzzing without stopping. The comments were already in the thousands. Strangers were calling me a thief, a liar, a fraud, and worse things I had never been called in my life. My hands were shaking. I scrolled up to check the account name. Part of me already sensed the answer. Seeing it confirmed still knocked the air clean out of my chest. My sister had posted it. Tessa. My name is Kelly Dawson. I was 31 years old with a steady career and a quiet life I had worked incredibly hard to build. In less than 1 hour, my own sister had set all of it on fire in front of the entire internet. I kept refreshing the post, as though the numbers would somehow stop climbing if I watched them closely enough. They didn't. The shares doubled while I sat there. Comments multiplied faster than I could follow. People were tagging my workplace directly, writing things like, "She shouldn't be allowed to work with anyone," and "Fire her immediately." Strangers who had never heard my name before that morning had already decided exactly who I was. Then a message came from my manager, Paul. Short and direct. "We need to talk. Now." I called Tessa immediately. The line rang twice. She declined the call. I called again. It went straight to a message saying the number had blocked me. She had blocked me within hours of posting that video. I sat at my kitchen table with cold coffee in front of me, watching notification after notification land on my screen. People who knew absolutely nothing about me had already reached their conclusions. Not one of them had asked me a single question. I called my mother next. Her phone rang 6 times and went to voicemail. I left a short message asking her to call me as soon as possible. 30 minutes later I tried again. Still nothing. Then a message came from my Uncle Gary, who lived 2 states away and only ever reached out at holidays. 3 words. "Is it true?" That message told me more than anything else had so far. Tessa had not simply posted the video and waited. She had moved ahead of time. She had contacted family members before the post went live, feeding them her version while I was still asleep. By the time I reached for my phone that morning, the narrative was already set and moving. My mother's silence wasn't confusion. It was something more deliberate. And the fact that my uncle, a man who barely knew my daily life, had already heard enough to send that question told me exactly how carefully Tessa had laid all of this out. She had planned every step of it. I made myself watch the full video that afternoon. It ran for 14 minutes. Tessa sat in soft lighting with her hair down, speaking in a slow and careful voice that sounded like someone who had rehearsed many times. The clips she used of me were pulled from old videos and family moments, casual things from years past. But she had edited them to appear current, to suggest the tension she described was ongoing and recent. Screenshots of financial transfers were displayed briefly on screen without any context or explanation. Portions of message threads appeared for just a few seconds before she cut away, never long enough for anyone watching to read the full conversation. And through all of it, Tessa cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough small tears, quiet pauses, the careful performance of a person presenting themselves as deeply wounded. It was convincing. That was the part that frightened me most. Because most people watching would have believed every single word she said. Paul was a fair person. I had worked under him for 3 years without a complaint from either direction. But when I walked into the HR conference room, he looked like a man who had been handed a problem he didn't quite know how to carry. The video was already open on the laptop at the center of the table. A woman from Human Resources named Carol sat beside him with a notepad. They let me speak. They asked for my side. But I could see the way they were holding themselves, careful, measured, slightly distant in the way people become when they have already made a quiet decision and are simply going through the proper steps. By the end of the meeting, I had been placed on temporary leave pending an internal review. I drove home without turning on the radio. I had done nothing wrong. I had a clean record, consistent work, and nothing to hide. But none of that seemed to matter yet. The accusation was much louder than the truth. I sat in my apartment that evening with the lights low, trying to think clearly. The memories came in pieces. Tessa borrowing $300 the previous spring, promising to repay it within a month. The month passed, then another. When I brought it up gently, she made me feel like the unreasonable one for mentioning it. Christmas 2 years earlier, arriving at our mother's house to find Tessa had told everyone I hadn't contributed to the shared gift, when I had sent my portion directly to her weeks before. The way she described our disagreements to mutual friends, always slightly adjusted, always with herself as the patient one and me as the difficult one. Each memory on its own had seemed small enough to ignore. I told myself all families had friction. I convinced myself these were minor things, not worth the conflict of addressing. Sitting alone that night, I finally saw them all lined up together clearly. It was never random. It had always been a pattern. I had just refused to look directly at it until now. I opened my phone that night and started writing a response. It came out fast, paragraphs correcting every screenshot she had twisted, laying out the real timeline, providing the full context she had deliberately removed. I wrote about the borrowed money, the edited messages, the carefully constructed version of events she had built her entire video around. When I finished, I read the whole thing back. It was honest. It was thorough. And it was exactly what she wanted me to post. A long, defensive, emotional public statement from the person being accused, the kind that makes already skeptical people lean even further the wrong direction. The kind that adds fuel when the situation needed less of it. I hovered over the post button for a long moment. Then I deleted every single word. If she wanted to use the internet as her weapon, then I was going to let the internet do exactly what it always did when given enough space and time to work. I put my phone face down and went to bed. For the next 4 days I said absolutely nothing publicly. No response to the post. No statement. No comments anywhere. No private messages to mutual friends asking them to take my side. Nothing that could be screenshotted, shared, or added to a follow-up video. My phone still buzzed constantly. Some messages were angry. A few came from people who said the story didn't sit right with them. I read everything and replied to none of it. Something unusual began to happen. When the person being accused goes completely silent, the conversation has nowhere to go except back toward the original source. People began rereading the post more slowly. They watched the video again, this time with the careful, slower attention that second viewings tend to produce. Without a reaction from me to respond to, the audience had nothing to examine except what was already in front of them. And what was already there, once people looked carefully enough, did not hold together nearly as cleanly as it had seemed on first watch. The first crack appeared on day 3. A comment near the top of the post had gathered enough likes to stay visible without scrolling. The writer had taken 2 of the screenshots from Tessa's video and placed them side by side. The timestamps did not match the timeline Tessa had described out loud. According to her narration, those messages were sent during an argument in the fall. But the dates clearly visible on the screenshots placed them in a completely different month. Wait, the comment read. These screenshots don't add up. Why does the timeline keep changing? A reply appeared beneath it immediately. I noticed the same thing. She says this happened after the holidays, but that message is from July. The likes on both comments climbed fast. This was what people who use public platforms as weapons often miscalculate. Once an audience suspects they've been misled, even slightly, even in a single detail, they stop being supporters and become investigators. For the first time, the comment section was no longer entirely against me. A message arrived in my private inbox on the 4th evening. The sender was in Whitfield, a woman who had been close to our family for years when I was growing up, before life pulled everyone in different directions the way it does. She wrote carefully. She said she had seen the post and watched the video. Something had felt wrong to her immediately, though she couldn't name it precisely at first. So she went looking. Attached to her message were screenshots she had saved from years earlier. Direct messages from Tessa asking and for money, describing a situation with specific details that directly contradicted what Tessa had told the public in her video. I knew something felt off, and wrote at the bottom, I should have said something sooner. I'm sorry I didn't. I sat with that message for a long time. I thanked her and asked her to keep those records somewhere safe. She was the first person to reach out with something concrete and verifiable. She would not be the last. On the 5th day, an email arrived from a marketing agency. They were a firm that had been running brand campaigns with Tessa for the past year. The email was addressed to me by name, which meant they had done some searching to find my contact information. The tone was professional and measured. They said they were aware of a situation currently circulating online involving a member of their creator roster. They were conducting an internal review of content and related claims. They had a few specific questions about details mentioned in recent posts. They listed 4 points from the video, each one something that could be verified or disproven with the right documentation. They were not accusing Tessa of anything. Not yet. But they were asking questions. Quietly and very carefully. The fact that they had reached out to me, rather than simply waiting for Tessa to explain herself, told me everything about where their confidence in her currently stood. They were already pulling the thread loose. I spent 2 full days organizing everything I had. Printed copies of message threads spread across my kitchen table, arranged by date. Bank records flagged against specific claims from the video. Original unedited versions of the conversation she had screenshotted. Full threads with everything she had trimmed showing clearly in context. The more I organized, the more visible the timeline became. And the more visible the timeline, the more obvious it was that this was not the first time Tessa had done something like this. It was simply the largest and most public version of it. 2 years earlier, she had posted a vague story about a friend who betrayed her, which had cost that friend a part-time job. Before that, a former roommate had been publicly accused of something that unraveled once the full story surfaced. Different details each time. The same structure underneath. I created a folder on my laptop and labeled it simply, Evidence. I saved everything into it. I was not planning to post any of it. I was simply making sure it existed in one organized, accessible place. A video appeared on a Friday afternoon. It came from a woman named Beth, someone I had never met, but who had been close to Tessa for roughly 2 years before the friendship ended in a way Beth described as confusing and hurtful. Beth was careful in how she framed it. She didn't mention me or reference the current situation directly. She said she had seen something online recently that gave her the push she needed to share her own experience. She described a version of events being shared publicly that positioned her as the problem. She talked about messages being shown without their surrounding context, and about the way the story she heard repeated seemed to shift slightly each time. She never used the word liar. She simply described what had happened to her and asked questions. But the comment section connected the dots entirely on its own. People who had seen Tessa's original post were now sitting with a very different set of questions about the full picture. The story had stopped being simple. My mother called on a Sunday morning. She sounded different from the careful silence she had offered in the first few days. Less certain now, more deliberate with each word. We exchanged small talk for a moment. Then she said what she had called to say. Tessa told me you've been working behind the scenes to make her look bad. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend myself with a long explanation. Mom, I said. I haven't posted a single word publicly since any of this started. Not one statement, not one comment, nothing. Silence. Just watch what happens, I said. That's all I'm asking. Wait and watch. She didn't respond to that directly. We said quiet goodbyes and I set the phone down. But I had heard something in the pause just before she hung up. She was thinking. She was no longer entirely certain about the version she had been handed. That small shift was more than I had expected from that phone call. The internet moved faster than I had anticipated. By the second week, strangers with no connection to anyone involved were posting response videos. They called them breakdowns. They sat in front of cameras with Tessa's original video playing in a small box on screen, pausing it every few minutes to point out what didn't line up. The timestamps on the screenshots. The inconsistency in the timeline she had described out loud. A moment near the end of her video where she referenced an event occurring during one particular year, while a post she herself had made earlier placed her somewhere else entirely on that same date. The audience Tessa had built, the same people who had shared her original post and filled my comments with anger, were now watching these breakdowns in large numbers. They were no longer an angry crowd moving together. They had become something more careful and harder to manage. An audience asking questions and waiting for answers that were not coming. The fire had started burning in the wrong direction entirely. Tessa posted a second video 12 days after the first. She looked different. Less composed, less deliberate with her pauses. The calm she had projected in the original was mostly gone. She sat in the same soft lighting, but something underneath it had shifted visibly. She said the response to her first video had been supportive, But that certain people, she called them haters, had been attacking her and spreading misinformation. She said she was sharing her truth and refused to be silenced by anyone. The comment section told a very different story. Even people who had defended her original post were leaving uncertain replies now. Several wrote things like, "Why is she so defensive if the facts support her?" or asked direct questions she never addressed in the video. A few regular supporters posted their own public confusion. She had doubled down when going quiet might have been the wiser move. Doubling down on a story that was already crumbling, I now saw clearly, was how you lost the internet, not all at once but permanently and without recovery. On day 15, an anonymous account posted a detailed comparison thread. It was simple and direct. No dramatic language, no accusations attached. Just Tessa's screenshots from the original video placed side by side, with what appeared to be the original unedited versions. The differences were visible to anyone who looked for more than a few seconds. In one thread, several lines of text had been removed from the middle of a conversation, lines that changed the meaning of the exchange entirely. In another, a date appeared to have been adjusted. In a third, a message attributed to me had been cropped so carefully that the name displayed at the top of the thread was no longer visible. The post spread quickly. People who had shared the original video were now sharing this one instead. By the following morning, the comparison thread had more engagement than Tessa's original post. Nobody came forward to claim the anonymous account. Nobody needed to. The tide had not simply shifted. It had reversed completely, all in a single night. The brands went quiet one by one. First the smaller ones. Product codes disappeared from her recent posts without explanation. A company that had tagged her in a collaboration 2 months earlier quietly removed the tag with no public comment. Then a larger one acted. A lifestyle brand that had partnered with Tessa for a full campaign season posted a short professional statement. They said they held all partners to a standard of honesty and transparency, and that they would be ending their current partnership immediately. They offered no specific reason. They didn't need to. The comments on that statement filled within the hour. Most carried some version of the same message. We knew it. I didn't post anything in response to the brand's statement. I didn't share the comparison thread or reference the breakdown videos making their rounds. I had not said a single public word in nearly 3 weeks. I had no intention of starting now. What was unfolding did not require any involvement from me. It was running entirely on its own. After the brand announcement, more people came forward. A woman named Claire posted a short video saying she had her own experience with someone she chose not to name publicly, but that something currently circulating online had given her the courage to finally speak. Her description matched Tessa's patterns closely enough that the comment section made the connection without her needing to state it directly. A man named Andrew posted screenshots of a financial dispute from the year before. He had loaned money to someone who never repaid it, and then shared a public version of the story that made him appear to be the unreasonable one. He had stayed quiet at the time. He was no longer staying quiet. Each person who came forward described the same general experience, different situations, different amounts, different timelines, but the same structure running beneath every single one. The pattern I had seen laid out across my kitchen table was now visible to anyone paying close attention. She had done this before. This was simply the version that grew too large to contain. She called me on a Thursday evening. I watched the screen through several rings. I thought about every day she had refused to answer my calls. I thought about the block that had gone up within hours of the original post. Then I picked up. Her voice was nothing like the composed, tearful version she had presented on camera. She sounded genuinely exhausted. Worn through in a way that didn't feel like performance, like someone finally feeling the full weight of something they had set in motion themselves. "Kelly," she said. Then silence stretched between us. "Can you just tell people to stop?" The question took a moment to process completely. This was the person who had posted my face online with an accusation attached to it. The person who had called the family before I woke up. The person who had blocked me and then posted a second video doubling down on every false claim. And now she was calling me to ask if I could make it stop. I didn't yell. I had spent 17 days making deliberate choices, staying quiet when everything in me wanted to defend myself out loud. I was not going to lose control of the one thing I had managed to hold on to throughout all of it. I let the silence between us sit for a moment after her question. Then I said it. "You started this publicly, Tessa. That was the only thing I said. She started to respond, something that sounded like the beginning of an explanation, or possibly another version of her story. I didn't wait to find out where it was going. I hung up. I set my phone on the kitchen counter and stood in the quiet apartment for a moment, looking at nothing in particular. Outside, the street carried ordinary sounds. A car passing, music from somewhere nearby, the plain background noise of a world continuing without drama. I had not threatened her. I had not accused her of anything. I had simply said the one true thing that mattered. She had chosen this arena. The consequences lived there now too. The following week, a video went viral. It was not mine. It came from a content creator who regularly covered online accountability stories, someone with a large enough following that when they posted, the numbers moved fast. The video ran for 22 minutes. It laid out the entire timeline from the beginning. The original post. The screenshot inconsistencies. Tessa's second video doubling down. The anonymous comparison thread. The brands withdrawing. The people who had come forward with parallel stories. Every piece placed in chronological order, clearly sourced, plainly explained without dramatic narration. By the end of the first day, it had millions of views. The comments were full of people saying they had shared the original post weeks earlier, and now felt ashamed of moving without waiting to think. Others wrote about how easily the narrative had carried them before they slowed down enough to examine it. The complete picture was finally visible to everyone. It had taken time, but it was there in full for anyone to see. Tessa posted an apology 3 days later. It was a written statement this time, not a video. Short and carefully worded. She said she had been in a difficult emotional place when she posted the original content. She said some things had been presented in a way that was not fully accurate. She said she was sorry for any pain caused. She did not name me directly. She did not acknowledge the edited screenshots. She did not address the people who had come forward with their own stories. The response was not anger. It was something that felt heavier than anger. A complete collective exhaustion with her. Comment after comment said the same thing in different words. Too little, too late, and still not honest enough. Her follower count dropped steadily over the following days. Remaining partnerships went quiet. People who had been vocal supporters simply disappeared from the conversation entirely. She had not just lost credibility. She had lost the platform she had spent years building piece by careful piece. Paul called on a Wednesday morning. He sounded genuinely relieved when I picked up, which told me more about what the review process had been like on his end than any explanation could have. He apologized for how the situation had been handled from the beginning. He said the review was fully complete and that my record was entirely clean. He told me I was welcome to return to my position immediately, with full reinstatement and no gap in my employment history. I thanked him sincerely. Then I told him I wouldn't be coming back. A brief pause on his end. I think he had expected something different, a request for a raise, a title change, some formal acknowledgement built into my return. That wasn't what I meant. I had spent 17 days watching my livelihood threatened by words that had nothing to do with my actual work or my character. But I had also spent 17 days thinking very clearly about what I wanted the next chapter of my life to look like. The answer was something that couldn't be taken down by someone else's words. Months later, I was somewhere new. A different city. A smaller apartment with better morning light. A freelance client list built steadily from one referral that led to another, and then another after that. No single manager to answer to. No office politics. No central point of failure that someone else could aim at and damage overnight. My mornings were calm. I made coffee before checking my phone. I went for walks and came home to work I had chosen, at a pace I had set entirely for myself. Tessa and I had not spoken since the Thursday phone call. My mother and I talked occasionally, careful, short conversations with a distance between us that might close over time or might not. I had stopped trying to predict it. I had not destroyed my sister. I hadn't needed to. I had simply stepped aside and trusted the truth to find its own footing. I had stayed quiet when silence was the harder and smarter choice. The internet found what was real. It always does when you give it enough room and enough time to look.